Okay, I'm going to cover the filters for the machine. Basically, you've got three filters on this machine. You've got the engine oil filter, which is going to be down there. So I can put my finger on so you can see it. So that is the engine oil filter. The best way to get to that is to take off the side panel, and you can see the side panels there on the ground. And the panels are really easy to take off. You're going to have a little lever system that's going to release it, and there's a slot that you pull these panels off away from the machine on top, and on the bottom there's just a little groove or a notch that you put the panel in. This is what the panel sits on here. You can kind of see it, and then there's one in the back as well. So there's a little like groove in the panel, and it just it rests on these, and then it rests. The slots go through these little clips, and then you turn them and you fasten them back on like that. So this is the oil filter. You would take that off like any other oil filter with a wrench, a flat filter wrench, or if you've got the actual sockets, you could put that on there. You know, you're gonna spin that off, and you're gonna put a new one on there. Always try to use the John Deere filters on these, even though you can use aftermarket filters. There's a couple aftermarket filters that I personally like. First one is Napa. Napa Gold filters are really good. And then Wix. Wix makes a really good aftermarket filter as well. So I like Napa or Wix, but like I said, if you can get the John Deere ones, just do that, because a lot of people try to save money on a filter, and the reality is you've got a $30,000 machine and you're saving $10 on a filter. I'm not sure if that makes a lot of sense, if you know what I mean. So get the right filter on there, and if you have to use aftermarket, use something that's decent. The other two hydraulic filters, I'll show you where those are located on the machine. One is going to be, I'm on the right side, but one is going to be covered, and you won't be able to get at it unless you take off this cover. This is where the transmission filter is, and if you take off these I think there's 4 nuts or bolts in the front, you loosen those. You just have to take off the rear ones, and then you can slide the pan down and back, and the 4 in front you just loosen. So it's kind of like you take the 2 back ones off all the way, but the 4 front ones, you can just loosen those up. Once you get this pan off, you'll see the filter. Now on this filter for the transmission, don't use aftermarket, and that's kind of like the rule of thumb with transmissions. Always use the factory John Deere filter on this, because this is the one filter that if something was to go wrong with it, for example, if you were to get air trapped in this filter and you didn't let the machine circulate the fluids to get the air out, and you ran it hard, you could damage your transmission, because the air in that filter will eventually come out and cause the transmission to slip and then engage, and it's kind of like a slamming of the transmission that you'll get, and that's when you can damage the internals on the hydrostatic transmission. So never use, an aftermarket filter, unless you absolutely have to for some reason, but just try not to use it. Use the John Deere one, and when you change this one, you want to let the machine idle for a good 5 minutes in neutral, right? Let this filter completely evacuate itself of any air, because if you do get air in there and it is to start coming out and get into the transmission, it's gonna slam the transmission, and that could damage it. So that's always what they talk about with these hydrostatic filters. When you change them, just try not to do that. Let the machine idle 5 minutes, and then even when you first start to drive it, just go really easy on it. Keep it in a really low, the lowest gear. Go easy on it. Drive it around, for a little bit, and then you should be good to go. The other filter that's on this machine is the suction filter for the hydraulics. The hydraulics on this machine has a pretty decent size suction filter, and this machine has two pumps. One pump for the power steering, and one pump for the front loader, and then the third pump obviously is in the transmission. And so the way these are set up is that the hydrostatic transmission motor, the hydrostatic motor itself, and the pump is one unit, and it's in the transmission area. So that's why there's a separate transmission filter that sits in there. And then this big filter is really just to run everything else. And really, there's two other pumps, one for the implements and then one for the power steering on the John Deere's. They're really nicely set up that way because under load, the power steering won't be affected, and vice versa for the implements if you have a hard time steering. All separate pumps. You obviously have a lot more power that way with separate pumps. So those are the three filters. You got two hydraulics and you've got one engine oil filter. I will show you a couple other things you can check. There is an air filter in here. The other thing you can check is the air filter, which is under here. You've got an outer and an inner, and these clips come right off, and you can pull this out. I'm not going to do it, but you would want to check that and usually change it if it gets dirty. The service interval is probably, you know, in the manual, but always just check it by visual. That's a better way to do it. There is another way you can keep an eye on your air filter. There's this little suction gauge, and if that comes to be red, which means that there's a lot of resistance on the intake and the filter is clogged, this will be red. You can click this button to reset that, and then you can probably watch it go back to red until you change this filter. So that is also another way, you know, visually looking at the filter and then visually inspecting the filter gauge. And when that turns red, it means it's pulling vacuum on this gauge, which indicates too much vacuum being generated with the filter being plugged up. And the final thing I'll show you is where to check the level for the oil on the hydraulics. It's a little hard to see, but if you look in here, there is a window in there. I don't know if I'll be able to get to it, but there's a window up there. You can kind of see it. But there you go. So that is the glass, the sight glass for the oil. That should be in the center with hydraulic oil. So that's how you can tell if you're low or if you're too full or whatever. But that's the window right there. It's just next to the rear PTO. And of course, this one has a backhoe, so it's a little hard to get to it. But that's where it is. Okay, that covers the basic filters and oil location on the 4210. I hope that helps you out. Okay, so I wanted to include the one thing I forgot to mention. There's a fill for the hydraulics right there. It's that yellow cap. You would spin that off and get a long funnel, and you would add the hydraulic oil right there. Again, your sight glass on the oil should be about halfway, right in the middle is where you want it. And if it's low, you would add oil right there.